I had badged through that door 4,000 times. I knew the exact weight of it, the way the handle stuck a little in October when the building's heat first came on, the small green light that blinked once before the lock gave. So when the reader turned red under my thumb on a gray Tuesday morning, I understood, before anyone said a single word to me, that the company already knew something I did not. I tried the card again. Red. A third time, slower, as if patience were the variable. Red. Behind the glass, the lobby of the company I had built looked exactly as it always did, the same long reception desk I had chosen the wood for, the same wall where we had hung the first printout of the first thing we ever shipped, framed now, lit from above like a small museum of ourselves. The receptionist, a kind young man named Aaron, who had once cried at our holiday party telling me this was the first job that had ever felt like home, looked up, saw me through the glass, and looked back down at his screen so fast that I felt the truth of the morning land in my chest like a stone dropped down a well. Aaron knew. Aaron, who could not look at me, knew before I did. Someone buzzed me in. Not Aaron, a security contractor I half recognized, in a blazer that did not fit him, who held the door with the careful neutrality of a man who has been told to expect a scene and has decided not to be part of it. I walked into the lobby of my own company as a guest. On the engineering floor, through the second set of glass, I could see Devin Pace half rise from his desk. Devin was 26 then, the best young engineer I had ever hired, the kind of mind that made you remember why you started a company in the first place. He stood, and his mouth opened, and then a hand I could not see came down on his shoulder from the next desk over, and he sat back down. He looked at me through 2 panes of glass with an expression I would think about for a long time afterward, because it was not confusion, it was apology. Devin already understood what was happening, and he was sorry, and there was nothing he could do about it from where he sat. They walked me to the glass conference room on the 3rd floor. We had named it the kitchen, as a joke, because the company had started at my actual kitchen table, and we wanted to remember that. It had a long glass table and a view of the river, and a small brass plaque by the door that said, in letters I had picked the font for, every big thing starts at a small table. Whitney was waiting inside. She had dressed for it. I want to say that plainly because it is the detail I keep returning to. She had chosen a soft gray sweater, the color of something harmless, and she had her hands folded on the table in front of her. And there were 2 lawyers I did not know seated on either side of her like parentheses. There was a folder on the table. There was a glass of water poured for me, sweating a little ring onto the glass, which meant someone had poured it early, which meant they had been waiting, which meant this had a schedule, and I was simply the last person to be told the time. Cam, Whitney said, sit down, please. I had known Whitney Calder for 18 years. I knew the register of her voice when she was nervous, when she was lying to a customer, when she was genuinely happy, which was rarer than people thought. The voice she used that morning was none of those. It was a voice she had practiced. I could hear the practice in it, the way you can hear the click track under a song if someone points it out to you, and once you hear it, you can never not hear it again. She slid the folder across the glass. I need you to understand that this is the kindest version of a very hard thing. I opened it. It was a buyout-and-release agreement. I had seen 100 of them. I had negotiated a dozen for the company myself. This one bought out my entire stake at a number that was a small fraction of what it was worth, released the company from all claims, and on the last page, above a printed line that said Camille Hargrove, co-founder, there was my signature. My signature. The real one, or close enough that my own eyes stumbled. The C with the little open loop I had used since I was 16. The slant. The way the second L in Camille trailed off because I always wrote my name faster than I meant to. It was mine in every particular except the single particular that mattered, which was that I had never, not once, not on any morning of my life, signed that page. I looked up at Whitney. I want to tell you that I said something sharp and final, the kind of line you rehearse in the shower for the rest of your life. I did not. I looked at her, and she looked back at me, and for 1 second, 1 single second, something moved behind her face that was not rehearsed, and then she closed it like a door. We're going to tell everyone you chose to step back, she said. It's cleaner, for the company, for you, honestly. People respect a founder who knows when to let go. They do not respect a fight. One of the lawyers slid a single sheet toward me. It was a press statement, already written, already formatted in our brand font, announcing that I, the co-founder, was departing to pursue other interests, with a warm quote attributed to Whitney about my immeasurable contributions and her sadness at seeing me go. You forged my name, I said. I said it quietly. It was not a question. and it was not an accusation. It was just the fact. Sat down on the table between us, next to the sweating glass of water, so that at least one true thing would be in the room. Whitney did not blink. "I think," she said, "if you look closely, you'll find that the timeline of the financing made certain decisions for all of us. The bridge round had conditions. The board agreed. Everyone agreed, Cam. You can fight a board if you want. You'll spend 3 years and everything you have, and at the end of it, you'll still be a person who fought her own company in public." I understood then that she had built this the way I built software, carefully, in layers, with each layer covering the seams of the one beneath it. The forged signature was only the visible part. Under it was a board she had quietly stacked, a financing crunch she had quietly engineered, or at least quietly used, and a story she had been writing about me for years, so that when the day came, the story would already be furniture in everyone's mind, and no one would think to question it. I closed the folder. I stood up. I did not drink the water. "Cam," she said, and for one more second, the real voice was there, underneath. "Don't make this ugly. I don't want it to be ugly." "It's already ugly," I said. "You just dressed it carefully." They gave me a cardboard box. It is a strange thing to be handed a box in the building you built. Half the things in it were not even mine. Someone had swept a shelf into it without looking, and there was a mug in there that belonged to a designer 2 desks down. I carried it out through the lobby, past the framed printout of our first shipped thing, past Aaron, who still could not look at me, down the elevator I had ridden 10,000 times, and out onto the sidewalk. The morning was completely ordinary. That is the part no one warns you about. A man walked past me, eating a pastry from a paper bag. A bus sighed at the corner. 2 women laughed at something on a phone. The traffic moved the way traffic always moves, indifferent and full of people going to jobs that had not just dissolved under their feet. I stood on the curb holding a box of someone else's mug, and I looked up at the building with my own work humming away inside it, and I did not scream, and I did not cry, and I did not call a lawyer. I just breathed, in and out. The cold October air, the smell of the river, the ordinary city. Because here's the thing, I knew even then, standing on that curb, anything I said in that moment would be the small truth, the loud one, the one that sounds like a woman who lost a fight. And there was a larger truth that I could not say yet because it had not finished happening. So I said nothing. I held my silence the way you hold the last solid stone at the edge of a river, and I walked. People think a company is an idea. It isn't. An idea is the cheapest thing in the world. Everyone you have ever met has had 3 this week. A company is 10,000 small decisions made correctly while you are exhausted, and then made again the next day, and the day after that, for years, until the accumulated weight of all those correct small decisions becomes a thing that has a name and a building and employees with families. I made those decisions. That is not pride. It is bookkeeping. I want to be careful here because the temptation, when someone erases you, is to overcorrect and claim you did everything, and that is its own kind of lie. Whitney was good at things I was not. She could walk into a room of investors and make them feel that backing us was the smartest and warmest decision of their year. She could take a complicated thing and make it sound simple and inevitable. Those are real skills, and the company needed them. But the thing itself, the product, the actual machine that customers paid for, I built. I wrote the first version of it at my kitchen table over the winter of 2017 with a space heater rattling at my feet and a mug of coffee going cold beside the keyboard because I kept forgetting it was there. I slept under my desk through the first launch, not because anyone made me, but because the launch was at 3 a.m, our customers' time, and I would not let anyone else carry the risk of being awake for it alone. I knew every customer by name in the first 2 years. I knew which of them paid late and why, which of them had a hard quarter, which of them emailed at midnight because they ran their own small companies and midnight was the only time they had. So when I read, 3 weeks after that October morning, an item in an industry newsletter that described me as former co-founder Camille Hargrove, who departed the company in late 2024 to pursue other interests, I had to set the phone, face down, on the table, and put both my hands flat beside it and breathe the way I had breathed on the curb. Other interests. As if I had wandered off to take up pottery, as if the 7 years were a hobby I had grown bored of. The cruelest part of a clean lie is that the truth, said out loud, sounds like envy. If I had called that newsletter and said, she forged my signature and pushed me out, I would have sounded exactly like every bitter ex-founder who ever blamed the world for their own failure. The lie had armor, and the armor was its plausibility, and its plausibility was built out of years of my own quietness. I had spent 7 years letting Whitney be the face. I had built the face's credibility with my own hands, and now the face was using that credibility to bury me. There was a woman named Priscilla who ran a small chain of bakeries, and she had been one of our very first customers, back when the company was 4 people and a server we kept in a closet. She used to email me directly at all hours because the thing I had built sat at the center of how she ran her shops, and when it worked, she could pay her staff on time and order her flour and sleep at night. The week after I left, she emailed the company asking for me by name, and someone forwarded her a polite note saying I was no longer with the organization. She found me, eventually, through a mutual acquaintance, and she wrote to me, just to me, 2 lines. I do not understand what happened, but I wanted you to know that the thing you made still runs my whole life, and I think about that every single morning when it does not break. I read those 2 lines more times than I read the lawyer's letter that came later, because a press release can tell the world I departed. It cannot reach inside a bakery at 5 in the morning and erase the fact that the thing I built is still holding that woman's life up while she pulls bread out of an oven. That is what competence is, in the end. It is not a title, and it is not a line on a cap table. It is a bakery that opens on time because of decisions you made alone at 2 in the morning years ago. They could take my name off the door. They could not take my hands out of the machine. A week after I left, Devin Pace quit. He did not make a speech about it. He simply gave his notice, worked it out cleanly so as not to hurt the team, and then asked me to get coffee. We met at a place near the river, the kind with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and Devin, who is normally all forward motion, sat very still and turned his cup in a slow circle on the table. I want to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, he said. Nobody on the engineering side believes you quit. Nobody. We were there. We saw who answered the pages at 4 in the morning. We saw whose name was in the commit history on every hard thing. We just don't have a microphone, Camille. That's the only difference between us and Whitney. She has a microphone, and we have keyboards. That's a real difference, though, I said. A microphone is a real difference. For now, he said. And then he said a thing I did not understand the weight of until much later. The work remembers who made it. The paperwork forgets. But the work remembers, and eventually the work talks. I did not have a comeback for that, so I just drank my coffee. And we sat there, 2 people who had been quietly erased from a story, and we let the ordinary cafe noise wash over us. And it was, in its small way, the first time in 3 weeks I had felt like a person instead of a press release. I have to go back further because the forged signature did not start the wound. It only finished a sentence that Whitney and I had been writing together for almost 20 years. We met in the autumn of 2006, freshman year, assigned to the same group project in an introductory course neither of us cared about. I did the work. I want to be honest that I did the work partly because I liked doing the work and partly because I was 18 and terrified, and the work was the one place I felt sure of myself. Whitney took what I made and stood up in front of the class and presented it. And she was luminous, genuinely luminous, the kind of person a room leans toward, and the professor praised the presentation and looked at Whitney when he praised it. And I sat in the 3rd row and felt nothing but happiness for her. That is the part I need you to understand, because it is the trap. I was not resentful. I was glad. I had made a good thing, and a person I liked had carried it into the light. And the warmth in the room felt somehow like it was partly mine, because I had made the thing the warmth was about. I learned, at 18, that loving Whitney meant standing slightly behind her, and I learned to call that feeling friendship. It had another name, but I would not learn that name for a very long time. We stayed close through college and after. We took jobs at separate companies and met for dinner every other week and told each other everything. And then in 2017, over a bottle of cheap wine at my apartment, Whitney said the sentence that started the company. We should build something. You make it, I'll sell it. We'd be unstoppable. We sat at my kitchen table and sketched it out on the backs of envelopes, and it was, I will not pretend otherwise, one of the happiest nights of my life. When it came time to decide titles, Whitney said, gently, reasonably, I should be CEO. Investors need a single face, one person to call, one name on the deck. You don't want to do press anyway. You're the genius, Cam. Geniuses don't do press. And I agreed. Of course I agreed. I would rather have built than been looked at. We structured the cap table, in her words, to keep it simple, which I now understand meant to keep it controllable, and I signed where she told me to sign, because she was my best friend and the documents were boring, and I wanted to get back to the part where I made the thing. There was a dinner in 2022 that I think about often. We were raising our larger round, and Whitney told the founding story to a table of investors, and somewhere in the telling, she sanded me down. Not viciously, just a little. I started the company, she said, and brought Camille in early to handle the technical side. Brought me in, as if I had been hired into my own founding, as if the kitchen table had been hers and I had arrived later with a toolbox. I was sitting right there. I could have corrected it gently, the way you correct a friend who misremembers a shared trip. I did not. I smiled and I let it go because we were closing a round and I did not want to introduce friction at the table, and because, if I'm honest, 18 years of standing slightly behind her had worn a groove so deep that staying in it required no decision at all. It was just where the water ran. So when I tell you she forged my signature in 2024, I need you to understand that the forgery was not a sudden act. It was the last and largest version of a thing she had done in miniature 100 times, with my permission, for nearly 20 years. She had been editing me out of my own story in pencil for 2 decades. The forged release was just the day she finally reached for the pen. I did not start over to prove anything to Whitney. I want to be very clear about that, because the story would be neater if I had, and it would also be false. I started over because building was the only language I had ever spoken that no one could forge. I could lose the title. I could lose the cap table, the building, the framed printout on the wall. I could not lose the fact that when I sat down in front of a blank file, things came out of me that worked. That was mine, in a way no document could touch. In the last weeks of 2024, I rented a single desk in a shared workspace across the river, the kind of place with bad coffee and good light, full of people building things in the early hopeful stage before the world has decided whether to let them. I opened a blank file. I started again. Devin Pace joined me for almost no salary. I told him not to. I told him I could not promise him anything, that this was a person with a box of someone else's mugs starting over at 36, and he should go work somewhere with a future. He listened to all of it, and then said, "I didn't learn to build from somebody with a future. I learned it from you. I'll take the desk next to yours." So there were 2 of us, and then there were 4, and the new thing began to take shape the way the old thing had, line by line, decision by decision, in the cold, early mornings. I named it Cardinal, partly for the bird, which stays through the winter when the prettier ones leave, partly because a cardinal direction is a thing you can trust to be true no matter where you are standing. I did not put much thought into a clever name. I had learned my lesson about the gap between the face of a thing and the thing itself, and this time I wanted the work to be the loudest part. The work was good. I am allowed to say that now. Customers came, slowly, then less slowly, the way they do when a thing actually solves the problem it claims to solve. And about a year in, a man named Theo Marsh asked to meet me. Theo was a respected operator, a person who had built and sold real companies and had no need to flatter anyone. We met in a quiet office with the blinds half down, and he had clearly done his homework, and the first thing he said to me was the thing no one at the old company had ever said plainly. "I don't care what the newsletters said about you," Theo told me. "I've used what you make. With my own hands, in my own last company, before I ever knew your name. You're the real thing. The industry is always slower than the customers to figure that out, but the customers already know. I'd like to help the industry catch up." He came on as my partner. There was a night, early in Cardinal, that I think about when I need to remember who I am. We had our first real customer, a logistics company that had taken a chance on a company with 2 employees and a rented desk, and 3 weeks in, on a Friday at 11 at night, the thing we had built for them started to fail in a way I had never seen before. Devin and I sat in the empty shared workspace, the cleaners long gone, the bad coffee machine humming, and we took the problem apart, layer by layer, for 6 hours. It was the old feeling exactly, the one no title can give you and no title can take away, a hard thing in front of you, and your own mind sharpening against it, and the slow narrowing toward the place where the trouble actually lived. At 5:15 in the morning, I found it. A single wrong assumption buried 4 layers down that I had to chase by hand. I fixed it as the sky was going gray over the river, and Devin looked at me across the 2 desks and said, "There she is! They told everyone you quit, and here you are at 5 in the morning doing the exact thing nobody else can do." I did not say anything. I just watched the customer's system come back to life, green light after green light, and I felt, for the first time since the curb, completely and unmistakably like myself. That is the thing Whitney never understood about what she had taken. She took the building and the title and the framed printout on the wall. She could not take the 5 in the morning. She had never wanted the 5 in the morning, and the 5 in the morning was where the entire company had always actually been built. And here's the moment the ground began to shift under Whitney without her feeling it. Because in the early spring of 2025, I got an email from Gerald Voss. Gerald Voss was Halden's lead investor. He had written one of the largest checks into the company I built. He had sat across from Whitney at a dozen board meetings and nodded at her quarterly stories. And he emailed Cardinal, my new small company, because he had heard about our work, with absolutely no idea that the founder he was writing to was the co-founder who departed to pursue other interests from his own portfolio company. He came to our terrible shared office with the bad coffee. He shook my hand like we were meeting for the first time because in every way that mattered to him, we were. He had known me as a line in a press release. He was meeting me as the person who made the thing he was now excited about. He spent an hour with me and Theo, and he was sharp and warm and genuinely impressed. And as he left, he said, "I have to tell you, I don't understand how someone like you isn't already a household name in this industry." I did not tell him. I want you to know that I had the chance right there to hand him the whole story, to say the household name you're thinking of is built on my work and a forged signature. I did not. Partly because it would have sounded exactly like the bitterness I refused to wear, and partly, I think, because some quiet part of me already understood that the truth keeps its own schedule, and that a truth which arrives because you forced it is weaker than a truth that arrives because the world finally turned its head and saw. Whitney had taken the title and the table and the building. She had not been able to take the only thing that was ever really mine to lose, that I could build, and that the people who mattered could tell. She did not know it yet, but she was now standing on ground that I had quietly become a part of, and she had her back to me, and she had no idea I was in the room. In the winter of 2026, I read that Whitney Calder had been shortlisted for Founder of the Year. The award was the big one, the one our whole industry watched, given out each spring at a gala that everyone who was anyone attended. It was tied, that year, explicitly to the success of the product I had written at my kitchen table with a space heater at my feet. The citation, which I read 3 times because I could not make my eyes believe it, praised a visionary founder whose technical instincts reshaped the category. Technical instincts? They were going to give Whitney a prize for my technical instincts on a stage in front of every person who had believed her, and the unfairness of it sat in my chest like a stone, the same stone from the curb, the same stone from the cafe, a stone I was beginning to think I would simply carry for the rest of my life. A few days later, a letter arrived from Whitney's lawyer. It was very polite. That is the texture of this kind of cruelty. It is always very polite. It reminded me, with great courtesy, that the release agreement I had signed in 2024 contained a non-disparagement clause, and that the firm trusted there would be no public statements inconsistent with the agreed narrative of my departure. I read it twice. The forgery was no longer just a thing that had been done to me in the past. It was a leash. The fake signature on the fake document was now being held up in front of me as a reason to stay silent, forever, while the woman who forged it accepted a trophy for my life's work. They had erased me, and now they were using the eraser as a muzzle. I sat with that letter for a long time. I want to describe the particular loneliness of that winter, because I think it is the part of these stories that gets skipped, and it is the part that matters most. From the outside, my life looked like a recovery. I had a new company, I had Devin and Theo, I had customers and good light and work I loved. And underneath all of it, every single day, I carried the stone. I would be in the middle of something ordinary, buying groceries, waiting for a train, and the thought would arrive without warning. She is going to stand on a stage and be given a prize for my life, and there is a piece of paper with my own name forged on it that says I am not allowed to say a word about it. The unfairness was not loud. It did not announce itself. It just sat in my chest, the same stone from the curb, and I had begun to make a kind of peace with the idea that I would simply carry it forever, the way you make peace with a chronic ache by deciding it is part of you now. What I did not yet understand was that the stone was not grief. The stone was a decision I had not made yet. And a decision you have not made yet always feels exactly like a weight you have to carry right up until the moment you finally make it, and it turns out to have been a door the whole time. That weekend, I had dinner with Theo and Devin, and I showed them the letter, and Theo read it and set it down and said, "You don't owe that room anything, Camille. You have a company. You have us. You could skip the whole gala. You could be 1,000 miles away that night building and let her have her sad little trophy. And in 5 years, no one will remember the trophy and everyone will use what you make." Devin, quieter, said, "He's right. You could just not go. Nobody would blame you." and the terrible thing was that they were right. It would have been easy. It would have been understandable. It would have been, in every visible way, the dignified choice to rise above, to stay home, to let it go. I sat there with my friends and my cooling dinner, and I realized something that frightened me. The easiest version of me, the one who would skip the gala and rise above and let it go, was the exact same version of me who had let Whitney present my work in college, who had let her call herself the founder at a dinner while I sat right there, who had signed where I was told to sign for 20 years. The dignified, quiet, rise-above woman was not a stranger to me. She was the woman who had let all of this happen in the first place. I had spent 20 years standing slightly behind. The release on the table, the lawyer's polite letter, the easy choice to skip the gala. They were all the same invitation, the one I had been accepting my whole life. The invitation to disappear quietly and call it grace. For the first time, I understood that there might be a difference between rising above a thing and simply continuing to vanish from it. In February, my phone rang with a number I did not know, and the voice on the other end said, "Camille Hargrove, this is Gordon Vance." Gordon Vance was the chair of the industry body that ran the gala. He was a serious man with a long memory and very little patience for theater, and he was calling me personally. "We want you to give the keynote, he said. "The talk that opens the night. 20 minutes. We're tired of speeches from people who sell. Every year it's the same polished nothing from someone with a brand. This year, we want 20 minutes from someone who actually makes things. I've watched what you're building at Cardinal. I'd like that person to open our evening. Will you do it?" I stood in my kitchen, in the small apartment I had moved to after everything, holding the phone, and I understood the full shape of what he was offering me without his knowing he was offering it. He did not know it was Whitney's night. He did not know the product she would be honored for was mine. He was, with no idea of any of it, inviting me to open the gala that would crown my own erasure, and he was inviting me for exactly the reason Whitney had spent 20 years erasing. Because I was the one who actually made things. "Yes," I said, "I'll do it." I want to tell you what I decided in the days after that because the decision is the whole story. More than the gala, more than the speech. I decided I would not name her. I would not stand at that podium and say, "Whitney Calder forged my signature." I would not wave the document. I would not turn the most important night of my professional life into a courtroom, because a courtroom would make it about her, and I was finished, after 20 years, making things about her. I would simply tell the truth about building, about the kitchen table, about the 10,000 small decisions, about the space heater and the cold coffee and the launch at 3 a.m, and plainly without drama, about what it is to carry something for 7 years and then be told you chose to step back. I would tell my truth, in my own words, and I would let it stand in the room on its own 2 legs. The truth does not require a defendant. It only requires a room and enough quiet for people to hear it. I wrote the talk at my kitchen table, the same kind of table where Halden had begun. I wrote it longhand first, which I never do, because I wanted to feel each word with my hand the way I had once felt each line of code. And when it was done, I read it out loud to the empty kitchen, and I did not cry, and I thought, this time, the work has my name on it, and I am going to walk into a room full of people and simply be the person who made it. I accepted that keynote the way I had once signed the lease on my first real office, quietly, fully, and entirely as myself. The gala was in the middle of April, in a ballroom with too many chandeliers, the kind of room designed to make everyone in it feel slightly more important than they are. I arrived early, because I always arrive early, and I stood at the back for a while watching the room fill. I saw people I had not seen in 2 years. Some of them saw me, and their faces did a complicated thing, a flicker of recognition followed by the careful arrangement of someone who has read a press release and believes it. The co-founder who departed, pursuing other interests. They smiled at me the way you smile at someone who lost. I saw Whitney come in. She looked wonderful. I will not pretend she didn't. She moved through the room the way she had always moved through rooms, gathering warmth, and she sat near the front at a large table with her investors. And on the white tablecloth in front of her seat, there was a small placard, and I was close enough as I passed to read it. Founder of the Year. They had set it at her place like a dinner roll. Certain, pre-printed, already hers. She did not see me. Or she saw me the way you see a coat rack, a thing in the room that does not require attention. She was talking to Gerald Voss, laughing at something, completely at ease, the queen of her own evening. And the one thing she had not done, the single piece of due diligence that 20 years of letting other people handle the details had trained her never to do, was check who was giving the keynote that opened the night. The lights came down. Gordon Vance walked to the podium. "Every year," he said, "we open this evening with a speech. And every year, most of you politely endure it." There was a ripple of laughter. "So, this year I went looking for someone who doesn't give speeches, someone who builds. I found a founder whose work many of you have used, whose product many of you rely on, even when you did not know her name. It is my genuine pleasure to give you the founder of Cardinal. Please welcome Camille Hargrove." I walked to the podium. I have replayed the next 10 seconds more times than I can count, and they still feel slow when I remember them, the way a fall down stairs feels slow. I walked across the front of that room, and I watched the understanding move through it like wind across a field of wheat. The first person to understand was Gerald Voss. I saw it land on him. He had spent an hour with me in a shared office with bad coffee, deeply impressed, telling me he could not understand why I was not a household name. And now he watched me walk up to give the keynote at the Gala, where his other portfolio company's founder was about to be crowned. And I saw the two halves of the story click together behind his eyes, and his head turned. He turned slowly and looked at Whitney sitting beside him. And then Susan Albright, another senior investor at that table, saw Voss turn and followed his eyes and turned too. And a third investor I did not know turned with them. I reached the podium and set down my pages and looked out at the room, and in the front row, 3 investors had turned in their seats, one after another, to look at the woman beside them. That was all it took. I had not yet said a single word. The mathematics of the room had simply completed itself. The founder, who departed to pursue other interests, was standing at the podium of honor, invited as a builder, and the founder, being honored, was sitting very still while her own investors turned to look at her. I gave my talk. I talked about building. I talked about the kitchen table, about the space heater at my feet in the winter of 2017, about the cold coffee I always forgot was there. I talked about the 10,000 small decisions, about sleeping under a desk through a 3 a.m. launch because I would not let anyone carry that risk alone. I talked about knowing every customer by name, about the ones who emailed at midnight because they ran their own small companies, and midnight was all they had. And then, near the end, I said the thing I had come to say, and I said it plainly, without looking at anyone in particular. "If you ever build something with your own hands," I said, "and you are told one day that you chose to walk away from it, I want you to know something. The work remembers who made it, even when the paperwork forgets. You can be edited out of the story. It happens more than we admit in this industry to more people than we name. But the thing you actually built keeps your fingerprints on the inside, where no press release can reach. And the people who use it, the people who matter, they can always eventually tell." I did not say her name. I did not have to. I watched the room understand exactly whose story I was telling, and I watched them understand that I was telling it without an ounce of cruelty, which made it land harder than any accusation could have. I thanked them, and I gathered my pages, and I walked back to my seat, and the applause that followed me was a strange, charged sound. The sound of a room that has just been handed a truth and does not yet know what it is going to do with it. They gave out the award later, after dinner. The host read the citation, the one about visionary instincts, and called Whitney Calder's name, and Whitney rose. She rose to a thinner sound than she had expected. I watched her register it, the gap between the applause she had pre-counted and the applause that actually came. She walked to the microphone, and she was still beautiful and still composed. But something in her had started to come loose. Gerald Voss was not clapping. He was looking down at his phone, and then up at her, and then down at his phone, and his face was the face of a man doing math he did not like. Whitney reached the microphone. She smiled. She said, "Thank you. This means so much." She looked out at the room, and I think in that moment she finally saw me, sitting quietly at a table near the side, not gloating, not even looking at her with anything you could call triumph, just looking, the way you look at the last page of something. "We built this from nothing," she said, "the two of." She stopped. The sentence had a trapdoor in it, and she had stepped on it without meaning to. The two of us. The two of us was the truest thing she could have said, and the one thing she could not finish saying, not in that room, not with 3 of her investors watching her with their new and terrible understanding. "We built this," she started again, "from a small—" and her voice did the thing my voice had refused to do on the curb 18 months before. It broke. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can't. I'm sorry." And she set the speech down on the podium, the trophy still in her other hand, and the silence that followed was the truest thing anyone said all night. I did not engineer what came next. I want that on the record because it would be a more satisfying story if I had. And it would also be a different and worse story, the kind I had decided not to be the hero of. What came next was simply due diligence. The thing investors do. 3 days after the gala, Gerald Voss called me. Not to apologize on Whitney's behalf, which would not have been his to do, and not with any drama. He called the way a careful man calls when he has realized he built on sand. I backed a story, he said. For 4 years, I backed a story, and I should have backed the work. I want you to know the board has opened a review of the 2024 departure documents. All of them. The buyout, the release, the board consents. We've engaged people who look at this kind of thing for a living. All right, I said. I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I'm telling you because you deserve to be told something by someone in this, at least once. That was all. He did not need anything from me. The forged signature did not need me to expose it. It only needed someone to finally look, and once someone with subpoena power and forensic budgets started looking, a forged signature is not a clever thing. It is a fragile thing. It survives only in the dark of everyone's assumption that no one will ever check. The moment 3 investors turned in their seats, the dark went out of the room and the document could not live in the light. I never saw the forensic report. I did not need to. I watched the consequences arrive the way you watch weather you predicted. Whitney was quietly removed from the role she had stolen in a transition announced with the same brand font and the same warm language that had once been used to erase me, now turned, with no irony anyone seemed to notice, on her. The award was rescinded without a press release. The industry did not denounce her. It simply gradually stopped saying her name, the way a tide goes out, until one day you look and the water that was at your feet is somewhere far away, and you cannot say exactly when it left. The machinery of reputation that she had used to bury me turned out to be a machine that belonged to no one. She had aimed it at me, and it had worked, and then the room turned its head, and the same machine, with the same indifference, ground the other way, and the engineers, the ones with keyboards and no microphones, reached out to me. Quietly at first, then less quietly. Some of them came to Cardinal. Devin greeted each of them like family because they were. The people who had known the truth all along, who had sat at their desks 2 panes of glass away on the morning my keycard turned red, got to come and stand in the light of that truth and build again with the person they had always known made the thing. Aaron, the young man from the front desk who had not been able to look at me that morning, sent me a long message. He told me he had been instructed, the night before my keycard was killed, to expect me and to keep things calm, and that he had hated himself for looking away, and that he had thought about it nearly every day since. I wrote him back 2 sentences. You were 23 and they handed you an impossible morning, and you are not the one who did anything wrong. Come build with us if you ever want to. He came 3 months later, and he runs our customer operations now, and he looks everyone in the eye. I think that is the part of the fallout I am most glad about. Not the report, not the rescinded award, not the slow tide going out on Whitney's name. The people, the ones who had been made small in service of the lie, who had been asked to look away, who had carried their own quiet shame about a thing that was never theirs to carry. They got to set it down. A forged signature does not only erase the person whose name it steals, it conscripts everyone who has to pretend they believe it. And when it finally fell apart, all of those people got to stop pretending, and you could see them stand up a little straighter, one by one, the way a field stands up after the wind that had been flattening it finally moves on. I did not take Whitney's company back. People asked me in the months after whether I would try, whether there was a path to reclaim Halden, and I told them the truth, which is that I did not want it. A company built on a forged signature is a house built on a cracked foundation, and you do not move back into a house like that. You let it do what such houses do. You build a new one, on ground you can trust, and you put your own name on the door. I want to be honest about what it cost, because a story that pretends it was free is not a story you can use. It cost me a 20-year friendship. Not the version of the friendship that ended in the glass conference room, that one had been a performance for years, and you cannot grieve a performance. It cost me the other one, the real one. The girl in the 3rd row who was genuinely happy when Whitney was luminous. The 2 of us at the kitchen table with envelopes and cheap wine, building something, on what was honestly one of the happiest nights of my life. That friendship had been real once, before it curdled, and you cannot pretend a thing like that away just because it ended badly. I keep one photograph from the beginning, the 2 of us at my kitchen table on the night we decided to build the company. both of us laughing at something neither of us would remember, young and certain and unbetrayed. I keep it not to punish myself, and not out of sentiment. I keep it to remember that it was for a while, real. That is the part that costs. If she had always been a villain, the whole thing would be easy. A clean story with a clear edge. But she had been my friend, my actual friend, for years before she was the woman in the gray sweater, and holding both of those truths at once is the heaviest thing I carry out of all of it. There was a season of grieving I did not expect and could not explain to anyone. People assumed that once the truth came out, once the award was rescinded and the company changed hands and the tide went out on her name, I would feel something like victory. I did not feel victory. For a few weeks, I felt something much closer to widowhood. I would reach for my phone to tell Whitney a small thing, a joke, a piece of news, the reflex of 18 years, and then remember, halfway through the motion, that the person I was reaching for had not existed for a long time, and maybe never quite as I had believed. You do not only lose the friend who betrayed you, you lose the friend you thought you had retroactively, all the way back to the beginning, because every memory now has a question mark sitting in it that was not there before. Was she happy for me that day, or already counting? I will never know. That is its own small grief, the loss of a past you were sure of. What healed it in the end was not an answer. It was time, and it was work, and it was the slow accumulation of new mornings that had nothing to do with her. One day, I noticed that I had gone a whole week without reaching for the phone, and then a month, and then I noticed that the photograph on my shelf had become just a photograph, a picture of two young women at a table, and not a wound I pressed every time I walked past it. The ache did not vanish. It just stopped being the loudest thing in the room. That is the most honest thing I can tell you about how this kind of grief ends. It does not end. It quiets, and eventually the quiet is large enough to live inside. One night, late, a message came from Whitney, the first direct word from her since the conference room. It was half an apology and half an excuse, which is what most apologies are. "I told myself you'd left," she wrote. I almost believed it. It was easier to believe it than to know what I'd done. "I'm sorry, Cam. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that I knew the whole time that it was you. It was always you." I read it 3 times. I believed her. I think she was sorry, in the real and useless way people are sorry after the thing cannot be undone. And I also knew, with a clarity I had spent 20 years not having, that I was finally, completely done, standing behind her. Both of those things were true at the same time, the sorrow and the doneness, and they did not cancel each other out. They just sat together, quietly, the way true things do. I did not reply. Not out of cruelty, out of peace. There was nothing I needed to say, and there was nothing she could say back that would change the shape of what was now true, and I had spent 2 decades giving Whitney the last word in every room we were ever in. I set the phone down, face up this time, and I let the message sit there unanswered, and I went to bed, and I slept. The next morning I walked into Cardinal, my own company, my own name on the wall by the door, Devin at the desk next to mine, and Theo on the phone in the corner, and I sat down in front of a blank file and I built. Because that was the thing that had ever healed me, the only thing, the language no one could forge. Being right had cost me a great deal, but I was beginning to understand that being right and being whole are not the same thing, and that I had finally, after a very long time, chosen the second one. Cardinal grew. Not explosively, not in the way that makes newsletters breathless, but the way a true thing grows steadily in the direction of the people who value it. We stayed small longer than we had to, because I had learned something about the cost of growing faster than your foundation, and I was never going to build on sand again. My name is on the door. I did that on purpose, not out of vanity, out of memory. After everything, I wanted there to be no gap, ever again, between the face of the thing and the thing itself. One afternoon, a young founder came to see me. She was building something with a charismatic partner, and she had the particular shine of a person at the happiest stage, the envelope and cheap wine stage, and she asked me how to structure the company, how to do the cap table, how to split the titles. I looked at her for a moment, and I saw myself at the kitchen table in 2017, and I told her the one thing I wish someone had told me then. Put your name on what you make, I said. Not for pride, for protection. Structure it so that your contribution is written into the bones of the thing, where it cannot be edited later by someone with a better microphone. Be generous with credit, be generous with equity, be generous with everything. But never be generous with the truth of who built it. Because one day, and I hope it never comes for you, Someone may tell the world you walked away. And on that day, you want the world to already know better? She wrote it down. I hope she never needs it. I suspect she will. And then I went home to a small apartment with a small kitchen and a small table, and I opened my laptop, and I started sketching the first version of something new, a thing that did not exist yet, that only I could see. The space heater was newer. The coffee still went cold beside me because I still forgot it was there. Some things about a person do not change, and should not. I had started in a kitchen, and I had ended in one, and the only thing that was different, the only thing in 18 years that had finally, fully changed, was that the name on the work was now unmistakably beyond the reach of anyone's pen, my own. I want to talk to you for a moment. Not as a character in a story, but as one person to another, because I suspect some of you know exactly the room I have been describing, even if your room had different furniture. If someone you trusted has rewritten you out of your own story, if you carried something for years and were told you chose to set it down, if you have spent so long standing slightly behind a person you loved that you forgot you were ever allowed to stand level with them, then hear this, because it is the one true thing I carried out of all of it. You do not have to shout to be true. You do not have to wave the document or win the argument or have the last word in the room. Build your thing, put your name on it, into the bones of it, where it cannot be reached. And then let the work say what you are too dignified to stand up and argue. The truth keeps its own schedule. You cannot rush it and you cannot force it, and the versions you force are always weaker than the versions that arrive on their own. But it does arrive. It turns the heads in the room when it is ready, and not 1 second before, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop it once it does. The work remembers who made it. The paperwork forgets, but the work remembers, and eventually, in a room you did not even know you would be standing in, the work talks. And one more thing, because I wish someone had said it to me on the curb that October morning. Your restraint is not the same as your silence. I was quiet for 20 years because I was disappearing. I was quiet on the night of the gala because I was finally completely present. They can look the same from the outside, the disappearing and the presence. They are opposites. Learn the difference between the silence that erases you and the silence that is simply you, standing fully in a room, letting the truth do the talking because you no longer need to. So will you when it is time. Until then, build. Quietly, fully, and entirely as yourself. Take care of yourself. I am glad you were here.